Okay, welcome to El Maestro. My name is Victor Lecha III, and you are with me. Today is May 12th, and I'm glad you joined me here today for the 5th episode of this podcast. I hope you enjoyed Mother's Day. And for all those mothers out there, wishing you a happy Mother's Day that just passed. Incredible work you all do. I said it before and I'll say it again. The future is female. And thanks to you lovely mothers out there for all that you do. So I hope you enjoyed your Mother's Day. I had a good weekend, at the tail end of my weekend now. And I hope you enjoyed your weekend as well too. I actually went off to the batting cages. In baseball batting cages. We do have listeners in the UK, and I found out there are cricket batting cages. So we have baseball batting cages here in the United States, and there's cricket batting cages over there in the United Kingdom, and I'm sure other places in the world that play cricket, as also for those other countries that play baseball. But before I get into that story, just want to go ahead and give you some of the few items that we talk about at the top of every episode for this podcast. The first and foremost is you might hear me munch during the podcast. I hope that doesn't deter you. I actually did all my munching already, so you don't got to worry about it. Just in case you're curious, I like to munch on some Takis crisps, as we say in the UK, or chips, as we say here in the United Kingdom. Although they're really interesting. They don't really look like chips or crisps. They look like taquitos, if you know what taquitos are, but like smaller taquitos. And they're delicious. So I had those. I'm not going to be drinking anything, but sometimes I might be drinking a Monster like I was last episode. So I give you the energy to give you the kind of content that you require and deserve. The final thing is that I suffer from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And that simply means that sometimes I'm going to have difficulty focusing. I may have trouble bringing the correct or accurate facts from my memory to you who is listening to this podcast. I may get things reversed. And so that's why I always start every episode with corrections. And so before we get to that story of the batting cages, I'm going to go ahead and start with corrections. And the first is a major correction. Last episode, and hopefully you read the little blurb that I have in the podcast description or the episode description, because then you already know what the correction was. But it was a pretty big error on my part. But again, it demonstrates ADHD. I said the United States economy, the GDP, contracted by 3%, which would be quite a lot. It was actually 0.3%. So please forgive me for that error. 0.3%. The other thing is I had mentioned the M2 money supply, or I just said M2 whatever, and I shouldn't have thrown a fact out there. They're different money supplies, and one is M1 and one is M2. Perhaps I'll go into it in another podcast. I've been approached by a listener to do a podcast that kind of explains a lot of this, because there are some terms and there are some figures and people that, you know, if you're not following politics, because this is primarily a political podcast, we will delve into issues of culture and pop culture like we did last week, and I have some stories for you this week. But if you're not really familiar with politics or the economy, you may have a little issues following at first. I'm going to encourage you to continue to listen, and you'll catch on eventually. But I will do a podcast that explains some of these topics, because that would then allow you to listen more easier. And you'll be able to comprehend more and get more out of the podcast, which is what I'm hoping for. But the M2 supplies basically savings. And I would also think probably some, and I'll check this out for you, I'm not entirely sure, but I also think maybe some long-term, high yield long-term savings accounts. Like not just a normal savings account, but like one that gives you a higher interest yield if you put a certain amount of money in there and you're going to keep it in there for a certain amount of time. Say, for example, like a common one's a CD is what we call it in the United States. It may have a different term in the UK. So with that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little preview, too, of what we'll be talking about today. We're going to be really more international, more foreign news this episode of the podcast. But for those of my listeners who are in the United Kingdom, you're going to say, well, this is not international, it's domestic. Because we're going to talk a lot about the UK today. So for those of you who are more, US centered and don't, you don't really want to hear too much about what's going on in the UK. I'm going to save that news for the bulk or the last part of the podcast, so you can know when to stop listening. Although I would encourage you to listen, because as I've been mentioning in the other podcasts, we are a global economy. We're a global world now. So, what happens in different countries affects us. We're not isolated anymore. That time has passed. So I would encourage you to listen too. But, in case, you don't want to, and, you got your fill of the foreign policy portion of the podcast, you can just go ahead and turn off. And that's the beauty of a podcast. You can go ahead and control the content to your liking. And for those who are listening from the UK, I think you're going to really enjoy the content. We're going to go ahead and delve into the trade deal that was done between the United States and the United Kingdom. That was the first trade deal that President Trump has able to complete since his start of the global trade war called Liberation Day. We'll also discuss the trade deal with India and compare them to, and I'm going to really discuss about how I feel Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer really dropped the ball on the US-UK trade deal. That if it was more like the India trade deal, it would have been a more and fair, just deal for UK citizens and UK residents. We're also going to talk about, it appears that for now, the trade war with China is on pause. We'll talk about that in a minute. And that really the administration did do a 180, as we've been discussing they needed to do when the market was in bear territory and correction territory, meaning 20% down, and also, between 5 to say, I guess like 19% down is correction. You see there's a large gap there during the in correction territory. But also how there were CEOs who met with Trump from Walmart, Target, and Home Depot, warning him of the dire consequences, how he began to change his stance. He did a 180, saying he was willing to talk more with China, and, pausing Liberation Day, the global trade war for 90 days, also doing that with China. We'll get into that in a minute. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about, though, how that's only one real trade deal with the United Kingdom, and there's a pause there with China, too, but there's still all these other countries that he's going to have to make trade deals with, and Japan is seeming like they have some red lines of their own that need to be respected. So we'll delve into that. We're also going to talk about, someone who went really far for science. And how far would you go for science? I don't think you would go as far as this person, but you can let me know. We're also going to talk about how someone, and this is in UK, so for my Brits, in London, a boss was compared to Darth Vader, and apparently they didn't like that. I don't know. I mean, if I was compared to Darth Vader, I might be okay with that. Does that mean you're listening to me? Does that mean you're taking my orders? Apparently this person didn't like it. We'll get into that a little bit more. And I have another interesting culture story for you about someone who kept playing music for 7 hours straight and was driving their neighbors crazy. That sounds like a party to me, like a rager or a rave or, some incredible fiesta. But that's not, I don't think that's what it was. I'll give you some more insight into that. So I hope that gives you a little bit of a preview. And let me just talk about my day, about going to the batting cages. It was the day before Mother's Day, and it was great, man. It was great to get back out there. I'm practicing for the company softball game, the company that I work for. And so I had to get back out there and swing the bat. And it was nice. I went out there with my dad, and, I just had this moment of just like, I know how to swing a bat and hit the softball thanks to my pops. And, I would encourage, for those who play cricket to go out there and get out to those, those local businesses that provide that opportunity for us who are not in sports anymore, but can still go out there and enjoy some of our childhood. So I don't know what you did this weekend. I'm hoping it was great. And, like the first podcast, I wanted to give you a little bit of my weekend when I talked about going to the farmer's market. And you know what? That's what I wanted to do in this podcast too, to just give you a little bit of what I did and how it was. And I hope you're doing the same thing too, because, in this podcast, we talk a lot about heavy things. And it could feel like doom and gloom for a while. But remember, there's a lot of great things to do in this life. A lot of beautiful things to do. And so I'm hoping you're taking advantage of those. And it was fantastic. I hit the ball pretty well a couple times, and other times I straight up missed it. But it was a good time, and it was great. And I was, after that, just kind of going over the news, and I was really following the United States and China talks. And remember, the market started rebounding ever since Trump really made this 180, talking about how those tariffs can't stay up there forever against China. We're going to pause Liberation Day. We're going to go ahead and speak with China. We're going to try and get a fair deal. And I mean, of course, I'm paraphrasing, not exactly in those words, but that was the sentiment. And then also, he stopped the talk of firing Fed Chair Jerome Powell, and the market has been doing better. And that, that really resonates with what we've been saying in this podcast, that this economy should be humming. And, if Trump would change his policies, if he would stop shooting himself in the foot, and the American consumer, American investor, American retiree, and the American businesses in the foot, this economy would be humming. And it really is right now. Now, we haven't recovered all the losses from when he took over in office, but we're starting to get there. And I think this is the final step to where we're actually going to see some, what we say in the market, bullish action, some more bullish action, and a lot more green days. U.S. and China both agreed to slash their tariffs for 90 days. Now remember, their tariffs were super high. America was at 145, and China was at 125. So remember, for everything being imported from the United States, it was 125%. And for everything, hold on, let me see if I got that right. I might just done an ADHD on you. Hold on. So the U.S. importing from China, 145%. China importing from the U.S., 125%. I corrected it. And they both agreed to slash their tariffs by 115%. That means the U.S. now have lowered their tariffs to 30%, which is still significant, by the way. Remember, we're in a trade war with Canada, and it's at 25%. So this is still significant. And China probably was part of this deal. Was like, look, we're as part of this deal was like, look, we're not going to remove our tariffs either. You place tariffs on us first, we're going to place retaliatory tariffs. We're going to lower them, but we're going to keep some tariffs on your goods coming into our country. And they lowered theirs to 10%. And that's where it is for 90 days. And we're going to see how that goes. And that 90-day pause is similar to the Liberation Day pause, but this one's actually going to end earlier. This is going to end later, This one will end sometime in August. I don't have the exact date for you. You can look it up. And the one with the rest of the world, the one that was Liberation Day, is set to expire on July 8th. Donald Trump's already on record saying that he wasn't going to extend that. So really what that means is that he needs to start doing more deals as he did with the United Kingdom, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, one of the countries that, might be the next one that he announces, or maybe that he's in talks with, which is why we're seeing a lot of news from, is Japan. But Japan is seeming going to hold their red line and saying that the U.S. has to scrap their 25% auto tariffs on their automobiles. That there's not going to be, no partial trade deal. There's no deal without a total rollback of that tariff. And I can understand why Japan would say that. And personally, as an American consumer, I'm okay with that. We know, how well Japanese cars are made, how well they do here, how long they endure, their longevity, their performance. It's all well documented on Consumer Reports. And to be honest with you, in a capitalistic market, the idea is with competition, the best wins, And I'm not going to say American cars have not caught up, because they have. But one thing you can do is when you can afford a little more already, sometimes you go ahead and you get a Japanese import. They're already, I think, a little more expensive than, say, some models of, say, Ford, or maybe some models of GM, like the lower end models, not the higher end models. And, maybe in their economy class cars. Now, I could be totally wrong. This is just anecdotal I'm talking. But the point I'm trying to make is that when all those cars are out there and I do Consumer Reports, even if they seem to be about even, and I want to have a Japanese car, if I want to have a Honda Accord, a Honda CR-V, a Toyota Camry, why should, the American consumer be punished by an extra 25% tax? Now, remember, this is what gets really frustrating. Japan's our ally. Japan has been our ally for a long time, and this is why some of these tariffs do not make any sense whatsoever. China is not an ally. China's an adversary. By adversary, I don't mean enemy, but adversary meaning that, we're competing for a position in the world stage. But even then, considering how much business we do with China, how we do have these relationships and supply chains set up, how those tariffs actually backfired and hurt America, and I'm glad they actually have been slashed. But at least there you could make a little bit more of an argument until you recognize the error in your ways. But you can say, well, China's more of an adversary. We want to go ahead and put pressure. Whatever argument you really want to say. But then you see how it's going to negatively affect American consumers, Americans with retirement plans, American portfolios, American businesses, and you do a 180. Fantastic. But with Japan and South Korea, it's really confusing. So I think that's great that the Japanese Prime Minister is saying that. Or this is the Finance Minister, excuse me. But I'm sure if it's the Finance Minister, then the Prime Minister agrees as well too. And he's going to hold his line there. And we'll see what happens. But honestly, and this is what's actually a little encouraging. Look, I always give credit where credit is due. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I did not think Donald Trump was going to go ahead and do a 180 or, start to become more open in regards to negotiating with his Liberation Day and tariff on the world, this global trade war on everyone. I honestly thought he was going to see it to the end and stay that stubborn, that bullheaded. But, he actually took input from, who knows, different advisors, from the CEOs, probably saw what the market was doing, and he reversed course. So maybe he does here too. I don't know. But what I will say is this is a little bit, interesting. I think this is how far Japan is willing to go ahead and play the cards that they have on the table, per se. But the Japanese finance minister said, that selling U.S. bonds is a card on the table. And we talked about that on the second podcast, how that's a big deal. When you start selling bonds, the yields are going to spike. The interest rates are going to spike. And that's going to affect, as we talked about before, mortgages, because the bond rates are the benchmark. The 10-year bonds are the benchmark for home loans. And also it's going to increase our borrowing costs because we have to go ahead and put out bonds at that higher rate, or perhaps even higher. And this is what's a little concerning. Asia, they hold the most U.S. Treasury bonds with $3.59 trillion. And Europe follows by $3.19 trillion. So this goes to show you that, Asia and Europe actually have some cards on the table. And they can't actually play it. And so I'm going to be curious to see how the rest of these deals go before Liberation Day expires. And we're going to be watching it with you. We're going to be on top of it. And, speaking of always giving credit where credit is due, on the last podcast we talked about, the last two podcasts we've been speaking about how Donald Trump has not been using his hardball tactics against Vladimir Putin and Russia, how he seemingly does it with our allies and even with Iran, but for some reason he won't do it to Russia. And I continued to say, if he's not willing to do it, then tell us why. And, this week he came out and actually went ahead and did some hardball tactics. He did. He told Russia and Vladimir Putin that if they don't agree to a 30-day ceasefire, if they don't agree to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire, he was threatening additional sanctions if the pause in fighting isn't respected. That's what we were looking for. Now, you might say, if you're not someone who likes Trump, and remember, I'm not a fan of Trump, but I always give credit where credit is due. And that's why you can always trust when you listen to this podcast. I'm going to hold everyone accountable, and I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Now, you might say, well, how is this different from, all the other times, like you've mentioned, where he's spoken strongly before? Well, because he actually went ahead and backed up or said that he would support the EU's 30-day ceasefire plan to Vladimir Putin and to Volodymyr Zelensky, to Russia and Ukraine. And if not, they were going to implement more sanctions, and Trump said he would support that. So that was a difference there. There had been this disconnect between the EU and America in regards to the handling thus far of the of the Ukraine and Russia war. So well done. That's when we're at our strongest, when we're working with our allies. And as I mentioned to you, Vladimir Putin responds to strength. And so what happened? All of a sudden, suddenly, out of nowhere, out of the blue, Vladimir Putin says, okay, Thursday, Istanbul, Turkey, which is, I think, May 15th, I will meet with Volodymyr Zelensky, and we will talk about a 30-day ceasefire. Now, will he actually do it? Will he actually show up? Well, I'm going to tell you what Winston Churchill has already told you. You got to appease an alligator. So something's going to happen. This is what I think. Some sort of excuse or some sort of reasoning that Russia or Vladimir Putin, that alligator, is going to say is legit as the reason why he can't meet or the reason why he can't accept the 30-day ceasefire. And he's going to put his shit back on the allies. He wants to separate the United States and Europe. And so, of course, he's going to hit it back to see if they actually do sanctions. And then, when they receive that tennis ball back from Vladimir saying, nope, we're not going to go ahead and agree to a ceasefire. This happened or this or other, and it's not fair, and you're not respecting us or whatever. It's going to be up to Donald Trump to hold his word, to hold his hardball tactics. Europe's already ready. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is ready. Macron, French President Emmanuel Macron's ready. The chancellor in Germany, I don't have his name on me right now. I apologize about that. Poland is ready. Everyone's ready to go ahead and to use measures that are justified now, like sanctions, to go ahead and bring Russia to the table. Again, 3-year war. 1 million innocent Russians dead. Say the same for Ukraine. 1 million Ukrainians dead. When is enough bloodshed? When does your ambition and your greed get satiated, Vladimir? So, that's my prediction. I think either the talks are not going to happen and Vladimir will give an excuse, or they'll meet and they'll say, no, we're not agreeing to the ceasefire, and they'll back off. And then it's going to be up to the EU and the United States to apply more sanctions. And, I just wanted to give this quote. This was before President Trump came out strong this past Thursday. This is from Estonian foreign minister. And, of course, Estonia knows about Vladimir Putin, about him being an alligator. They see it firsthand. All the Balkan countries do. He says it's time to push Putin to the corner. Putin understands only the strong position. And it's true. And now you see, he responds to strength, and so he responded. And now we're going to see exactly what happens from there. And, when you think about strength, you think about a lot of things. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to pivot to a culture news article. And we're going to talk about strength. And then, after that, we're going to go to this UK-US deal. I could go to it now because it ties in well with everything we're speaking of. But I want to give you a little break. We're near the 30-minute marker. And so I want to go ahead and talk about this article and about this strong man. Incredibly strong. And again, ask you the question, what would you do in the name of science? Well, I'm going to give you this little article and tell you that someone was instrumental in helping to neutralize the venom of 19 of the most lethal species of snakes, like the black mamba or the king cobra. I'm sure the rattlesnake as well. They used the antibodies of an American man to do so. Now, when you first hear that, you have to think, okay, this guy was bitten by maybe a black mamba and a king cobra and a rattlesnake. That'd be really unfortunate. You've been bitten 3 times. I'm sure they used his antibodies because he survived. And great. He went pretty far in the name of science. He didn't mean to, but, fantastic. Now we have these antibodies. Well, what if I told you he actually voluntarily immunized himself against snake venom by allowing himself to be bitten 200 times. 200 bitten by snakes. He is a Wisconsin truck mechanic, and I don't know, I guess somehow that wasn't enough for him. He wanted to contribute more to humanity. So he decided to get bitten 200 times by snakes so his antibodies could be used to go ahead and develop an antidote for these venomous snakes. But that still doesn't tell the whole story, because he also self-administered venom to himself 700 times. He did this over 18 years. Now, Spider-Man, he got bitten once and then he became Spider-Man? What kind of superpowers does this man have? Can he turn into a snake as big as Jafar in Aladdin? That would be the only way that a snake superhero would be cool, right? Because if all you could do is bite, I mean, how do you actually help the superheroes? You have to get close to your foe. Does that mean you play dead and when they come up to you, you bite them with the venom? And then they die? But then, of course, you're a superhero, so you can determine how much venom you give them just to paralyze them, to stun them. I don't know, but look, that guy, for his work, you get an applause, Wisconsin truck mechanic. 18 of your years spent getting bitten by snakes or administering venom, and now we have antibodies to the black mamba and the king cobra. I mean, when I was growing up, if you got bitten by one of those snakes, sayonara. Rattlesnake, too, you got to suck the venom out. Not anymore. Now, I think they're still working on the antibodies. They're trying them on mice. But how incredible. Speaking of saying goodnight, sayonara, after you get bitten by a king cobra, there was this London woman who enraged neighbors because she wouldn't say goodnight. She played music 7 hours straight. Now, as I told you at the top of the show, I thought for sure this had to be some sort of big party, a rager, a fiesta of monumental proportions, going on for 7 hours, playing club music. Now, you know, the one argument is, or the one topic of discussion is, if that's the case, why risk enraging or upsetting your neighbors? Why not just go to the club? I lived in the UK. There's plenty of clubs in London. Why not just go there with your friends? Well, maybe they couldn't get a VIP seat. I don't know. The lines are too long. So she decided to have it at her house. Now, look, she got fined £8,000. That's a hefty sum. What I don't understand is why didn't the police visit her before? And I think they're called PCSOs over there. But look, I know they respond to noise because I saw when there was a lot of noise disturbance, they would show up. They were really friendly, by the way. I had no issues with the PCSOs there. So I don't know. Now, she was given, in September of 2024, she was given a noise abatement notice. Basically, she was given a warning. So this is not the first time this has happened. So for sure, you think this is Party Girl, right? She just can't get enough. She loves throwing ragers at her house. Except one of the songs that was played was this song from 2019 by Elena Castillo that says, "I don't think I love you anymore." Now, that doesn't really sound like a party song, and I had never heard the song before. Sorry, Elena Castillo, just hadn't heard it. And I started listening to it, and my gosh, talk about depressing. Talk about crying in your beer or your whiskey. This is a true breakup song. So now I'm wondering, I don't know if it was actually a rager at all. Now, I don't know. I'm just going by these facts. I'm doing circumstantial evidence here. I'm trying to put these facts together to give you the story. I could be off here. You could do your own research. But it sounds like to me, she was in some tumultuous relationship. And the last time it happened in September 2024, she broke up with him or he broke up with her or it ended or there was some cheating or who knows whatever. She plays this music for 7 hours, probably that same song, drinking, and probably passes out, and the music just keeps playing. And then now, this recent time that just passed, same thing. You know, people get back in these, back and forth tumultuous relationships. I know. I'm a social worker. I've done therapy. I've seen these kinds of relationships. They're toxic. Britney Spears talks about it in a song. So, I mean, That's what I think happened. I don't think it was an actual rager. I think she was going through a breakup. And guess what? She started drinking and she passed out. And the music went. But she already had a warning from before. So they went ahead and boom! 8,000 pounds. For those of you in the United States, that's like $12,000. That's quite a hefty sum. And speaking of sums, we are going to go straight into the sum that, unfortunately, UK citizens and residents are going to have to endure because of this trade deal that was done between the United Kingdom and the United States. Now, let me first say, I am really mystified at the terms of this deal between President Donald Trump, and Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer. Because maybe a couple weeks before, he had done a fantastic deal with India. It was, a breakthrough deal, groundbreaking. It's going to eliminate or reduce tariffs on 90% of British goods, 85% becoming fully tariff-free within a decade. Fantastic. And the other way around, the UK will remove tariffs on 99% of Indian exports. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to go ahead and have zero tariffs, or as close to zero tariffs as possible. Fantastic. So it would stand to reason, you would think, that if that was the trade deal that was struck with India, then we should have the same trade deal or something similar. Now, I say we as in if I was, a United Kingdom resident. I did live there for 15 months. You would think we get the same deal or a fair deal with the United States. Now, remember, United States put 10% tariff on everyone. Everyone has this 10% tariff. That was what happened with the pots, because there were all these other, crazy tariff percentages that were placed on them. I'm not going to go into how they were calculated, but needless to say, from what I've read, they weren't calculated correctly. Now, the Trump administration calls them reciprocal tariffs. Just don't even think about that word because it'll confuse you. These are just the Liberation Day tariffs. And each percentage, they differed widely. Now, the United Kingdom, I believe they only had 10%. So they had this 10% tariff on all of their exports to the United States. And I could be wrong on this. I went over it quickly. So if I am, I'll bring it up on corrections. But I think as opposed to just one country, the United States is the largest trading partner the UK has. Now, I say one country because the EU is a whole block, right? So it can't be bigger than that. But it's just for one country, the United States is his biggest trading partner. So this is a significant amount of business that the UK does with the United States. And, before Liberation Day, before Trump's global trade war, Great Britain was able to go ahead and export cars. They export the Land Rover, Jaguar, McLaren, a bunch of other cars, okay? And with no tariffs on them. Well, they got imposed with a 27.5% tariff during that time. Then they also had a 25% tariff put on steel and aluminum. I think the whole world has that against them right now. So, what was this great deal then? So that's what the United Kingdom was facing. So what did they do? Why would they be so proud of this deal? Well, the British cars, as we talked about, they're at 27.5%. They're now lowered to 10% for up to 100,000 vehicles annually. And if it goes over that, it's going to face a 25% tariff. Now, that's about right, though. They sell about 100,000 cars annually. So some will go over 25% tariff. we'll get the 25% tariff. That's not that big of a deal. But my issue is, before you were, selling cars to America with no tariffs, competitive, global free trade market, and now you're hailing, we got this great deal, but it's 10% on top of automobiles when before it was zero. Now, steel and aluminum is gone. That's fantastic. But you don't do a lot of steel and aluminum with the United States. It's only 0.9%. So remember, one thing to keep in mind is that the United Kingdom does 59.3 billion pounds worth of business to the U.S. 9 billion is cars, and 0.4 billion, is iron and steel. So we already talked about only 0.4 billion gets a 0% tariff. Your cars now, 9 billion of which gets a 10% tariff. And agriculture, we're going to get to sell you United States beef, but it can't be with hormones. So that was something that, Sir Keir Starmer was proud about. And you'll get to sell beef over to the United States too. But there was a tariff there. And this is part of what I think President Trump was talking about in regards to we're being ripped off. And I don't know when this tariff got placed, but the UK had a tariff of 19% on US ethanol. And that's gone now. Now, my thing is, if you're going to remove that, which it should definitely be removed, or at least negotiated a lot down, make sure you're also taking care of yourself. That you're not only giving towards, your trade partner. Because what do we got here? What we have is automobiles go down to 10% when they were zero. Steel and aluminum have been zero, but it's only 0.4 billion of your 59.3 billion that you trade. 9 billion now, which is your cars, have 10% on top of it. So what does that leave? That leaves 49.9 billion of trade to the United States. Oh, and that should go to 0%, right? Because we didn't have a 10% tariff before. And the 10% tariff stays for some reason. So that means now on the 49.9 billion of UK goods that get imported to the United States now have a 10% tariff indefinitely. Whereas the UK only had a 19% tariff on ethanol. Still, that should not have been, I think, or that was too large. But now you remove that as well too. Now, you got to understand how this is concerning, because the United Kingdom's already projecting that their GDP, that the economy is not going to grow as much as they originally had thought. And remember, the GDP is important because that's the budget that determines how much you can fund in the government. And there's already budget constraints that we're going to talk about in a little bit that United Kingdom is facing. And so now you're going to go ahead and have 49 billion of your goods are going to have a 10% tariff on them, which means that'll likely contribute to having even a lower GDP output, meaning that your economy might even shrink even more. At a time when you need to be growing GDP, this decision actually makes it more likely that it's going to decrease, that your GDP will decrease. Let me give you some of these other figures. Medicinal and pharmaceutical properties, that's 6.6 billion. That's 11% of what you export to the United States will have a 10%. Mechanical power generators, 4.6 billion. That's 7.8% of the 49.9 billion. Scientific instruments, 2.4 billion. That's 4.1%. Aircraft, 2.2 billion. That's 3.7%. And there's other goods that amount to 34.5 billion. And that's 58.2% of the 49.9 billion. And they're all going to have a 10% tariff on them. Why? Because Donald Trump wanted it? No. Because your Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, didn't hold his ground. Or say, fine, you want to keep a 10% tariff on our goods? Then we're going to place a 10% tariff on your goods. That would have been equitable. So I'm really confused as to why he did that when we just talked about how the India trade agreement was both of them moving to zero tariffs, to being tariff-free. So why with the United States, you not take that position that is good for your residents, is good for your citizens, and is good for the economy? As we were talking about, the UK's GDP is projected to grow by only 1% in 2025. That's what? 100% lower than what was expected? Because they were expected to grow to 2%. That's a big drop. And now you add these tariffs on top of it. And I asked GBT to go ahead and to run some numbers about how much that would cost your economy. It's probably going to decrease exports by $5.93 billion and the impact on your GDP by negative 0.21%. That's the last thing you need, is to be decreasing the GDP, or to having your economy shrink, to having less money in the government, in the budget to be able to use, when we very well know that labor is talking about cutting benefits. And we're about to get to that in a minute. So it doesn't make any sense why Sir Keir Starmer has done this. Now, something to consider is, I'm trying to figure out how to do this segue, because that's just a big deal in regards to allowing a 10% tariff. I don't want to move off that yet. If you're going to put 10% on 49.9 billion of our goods, then we're going to put 10% back. Maybe you only say on 49.9 billion of their goods. If you're trying to keep it fair, or you do it more of a percentage, you figure out like the total of imports. I mean, we were talking about it. I mean, what would 49.9 be? It'd be like 85% of the goods. It's only like 15% that are, that's not even correct, because your automobiles are going to have 10% too. So essentially all of your goods are going to have a 10% tariff on it. That is really alarming when you consider how high the debt is right now for the United Kingdom. It's at 2.64 trillion. We haven't seen these levels since the early 1960s. And we're going to go ahead and allow our biggest solo trading partner to place 10% tariff on almost all the goods we import. When we did another trade deal with India and we both agreed to go to zero tariffs, I mean, there's not even a sunset provision on the 10%. Horrible decision, not considering the state of the economy and the state of debt right now in the United Kingdom. Now, we got to be honest here, though. Labour inherited this government. And yes, the debt is at 2.64 trillion. Those levels haven't been seen in 1960. But remember, they just came into office. Between 2010 and 2024, when the Conservatives, which are the Tories, were in power, the national debt increased by 169%. That is a horrible number. Horrific. 169% the debt increased, meaning that every year there was a deficit and they just placed it on the debt. They had to keep borrowing from the Treasury. Now, you would think that's because they expanded government programs. No, it's because all the tax cuts they did. And there's always this hope, this dream they sell you that, you know what, we're going to make tax cuts and it's going to increase GDP. It's going to increase the output, which means we'll have more money to tax. and that will go ahead and make up for the tax cuts. It doesn't happen, people. All it does is create deficits and adds to the debt. And now what's happening is because of those tax cuts, now you're having labor come in and they're proposing some draconian tax cuts. I mean, honestly, reading these tax cuts that are going to be voted on in June, and already 40 to 80 MPs in the Labour Party are saying they can't vote for this, or they're going to have a hard time voting for it. I'm wondering what the Lib Dems, I'm thinking the Lib Dems are all against it. This is a huge revolt on the left. Obviously, Greens are not going to be for it. And why are they against it? Because it sounds like you're Tories. It sounds like you're conservatives. They're proposing to get rid of, reform the two-child benefit cap. To keep it only for children under 5, disabled children, or working parents. I'm assuming for children under 5 as well. That means everyone else would not get this 2-benefit child cap. And let me tell you, part of the problem is on why GDP is lower, not just here but in the United States, is because we're not having as many children. And that's because those parents, millennials, Gen X, and Gen Z, are worried about the economic future, the political future, and the climate future. It's not as easy to raise a family anymore. It's too expensive. Including with inflation, but also in regards to cost of living, in regards to housing, in regards to rent. So now you're going to remove something that allows people to receive a benefit to have 2 children. Ideally, those 2 children go to work, which is going to help those people who are receiving pensions, who when they age out or when they get into pension retirement, and they also through their working add to the GDP. So this makes no sense whatsoever. Why would you do this? But the problem is they're going to say we're trying to take care of the debt. The debt was handed to us. Well, you got to find out other ways than taking away from the most vulnerable and taking away from a good middle class benefit as this. They don't stop there. As you know, if you're a UK, there's already 10 million people who've lost their winter fuel payments. That was a big thing. Now it's means tested. I think it was means tested before, but now it got even stricter in regards to the means testing. So, they've lost that. Then, there's going to be changes to universal credit. The universal credit is going to go ahead and remove elements for those who can't work, for those who are having health conditions. They're going to reduce the payment from £97 to £50. This is going to approximately affect 1.2 million people. There are disability advocates who are saying this is going to affect also, it's going to really affect 700,000 families who really need this money. This is just, you're reducing someone's payment from £97 to £50. That's like 100%. They're going to get less. And they can't work. These are people who've been, chronic illness, chronic fatigue, mental health issues. We're going to see what they do when this vote comes up. But this is why this trade deal is so surprising. Because why would you agree for 10% tariff on all of those goods, on all of your exports to the United States, when your country is facing a huge debt, your GDP is going to decrease, and now you're trying to take it out of the poor, the most vulnerable, and the middle class by cutting their benefits? Well, what are you saying? Well, I know they said there weren't going to be any taxes, but you got to figure it out. You have to figure it out. You don't want to put it on small businesses. You don't want to put it on middle class. You don't want to put it on the lower class or the poor and the most vulnerable. So they need to start acting like labor and figure out another way to go ahead and to balance this budget, or to keep it like that for a while. I mean, we're keeping it like that. We have our debt to GDP ratio compared to the UK is way more. So yes, you're on an unsustainable path, but you're looking for some other solutions, and you don't go ahead and take it out of those who most need it. Speaking of which, speaking of liberal Dems, the liberal Dems, the liberal Democrats, the leader of the party, Sir Edward Davey, he's saying that he's going to watch, they're going to be keeping tabs, or they're going to keep an account on reform, which is good. We were talking about this in the last podcast, that now reform has 10 councils. They have more councilors in there. That's democracy at work. But let's see how they do. And it looks like liberal Democrats are going to be the party to hold them to account. And that's fantastic. Like they were saying, some of the comments that Nigel Farage said that too many people are being diagnosed with mental health or disability conditions. Come on, man. I'm in the field. We don't just diagnose anybody with that condition. So if they have that condition, it's necessary. And believe you me, if they don't receive that assistance that they're receiving in the United Kingdom, and I praise the United Kingdom, and I do it in my book, and how I became homeless with a master's degree, that there's actually safety net programs for those who are suffering with disabilities, who can't work, mental health disorders. They just don't fall into homelessness. They can actually live. And maybe it's possible they can go ahead and get better over time to heal, and they get back into the workforce. I'm pleading with the United Kingdom not to do these cuts. As someone who does not have those safety net programs here and witnesses, and is witnessing right now so many homeless in the streets. And now we're hearing people talk about, there are counselors, there are elected officials talking about incarcerating the homeless. That sounds like something Darth Vader would do. Dun, 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 dun. Well, finally, I have this story for you. This comes from London as well, too. This woman, she was compared to Darth Vader. But it was not that simple. They were doing these personality tests. It was like an icebreaker at work. And she didn't fill hers out. And someone filled it out for her and did like the worst answers, I guess. And she came up with Darth Vader. Now, first of all, if you're doing that survey, or that personality test, maybe you don't do a Darth Vader. So that way you don't get into the problem that they came up with. Because she was offended. The other thing is, if you're a supervisor and you don't fill out the test, and then your employee fills it out and does Darth Vader, that's a joke, right? Like, laugh it off. Play with it a little bit. My friend in the UK says, you got to get used to the British sarcasm. Well, she's a Brit. Can't you, handle your own sarcasm? Mate? Lady? Well, apparently, a judge agreed with her and gave her $40,000 in compensation. Just for being compared to Lord Vader. $40,000. It's like 28,000 pounds. My gosh. I didn't know. I mean, anytime anybody wants to call me Darth Vader, so that way that I could go to a court and get $40,000 for being insulted. That's what the judge said. I'll take it. Really quickly, as we end today's show, we're right at that hour. Just a side note, but did anyone who watched Star Wars, I just had this thought the other day, recognize, why didn't anyone with the Force just take off Darth Vader's helmet? That's all you had to do. Obi-Wan, Luke Skywalker, just take off his helmet. And then all of a sudden you'd hear him gasping for air and he would die. Simple. Okay, I'll leave you with that. We were right at the hour. Thanks for listening to El Maestro. I will see you in a couple days. Stay lit!